morning, fellow streakers. It's Jeff, and I'm back with my co-host,
Hello.
Jamie. Welcome back. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you. It's
How
good
was
to
the
be
baby
back.
shower?
Wonderful.
I let everyone know that you were at the baby shower and that I was solo, and I was hoping that I represented you and I well.
You did. You always do.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you had a wonderful time out in Colorado. We are excited to be talking to you today because, as I mentioned in the last podcast, we're going to get back to basics. We are going to be talking about the 3 laws of streaking as well as a B statement over the next several podcasts. But before we start with law number 1 today, we've got a couple of highlights. First, I wanted to congratulate you.
Oh, on what?
On your streaks that you hit 400 days, which was awesome.
I did fit 400 days the other day. Yesterday.
It was yesterday. And the reason why I noticed it is because in the app, it did this really cool little animation.
We got a cool new little animation.
400.
Yes.
And so the streak was to do at least one family history activity daily, right?
Yeah. And that's been amazing. That has been that one is a testimony to me that doing something laughably simple and not much more still makes a difference.
And a massive difference. Because prior to this, you really hadn't studied your family history
at all.
At all. Zero.
Not really at all. Other than just my own, personal stories from my life, my own life, but nothing that had expanded much past that.
Right.
And now I feel like I have a lot more knowledge about my ancestry and where I've come from than I ever did before. And I really don't do a ton with that one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really do keep that one laughably simple. I've had one experience where I delved into it more and had my awesome experience with finding my grandfather. But much past that time, and that was that a year ago, 2 years ago? It's been a little while.
It had to be 2 years ago.
That was 2 years ago. Anyway, it's been at least, it's only a year because my streak's only 400 days old.
Exactly. It could only be a year.
It's a year ago, which is interesting because that was at the beginning.
Can have been 2 years ago, right?
That was at the beginning of the streak.
We can do math.
I'm just not going to even comment and say that because it's debatable. So anyway, but since then I just haven't delved into it a ton other than my laughably simple part of it. But I feel like I have gotten so much back from even the laughably simple. Which
lends itself to the conversation last podcast where we're talking about the floors. And you have set up a floor of you're going to do at least one thing with family history daily, and that's your floor. And you're going to stand on that floor. And sometimes you'll reach for a much higher goal, but you've got to have a solid floor on which to stand in order to reach for that goal.
And it's interesting to me that when you stand on the floor, that sometimes it takes longer than you think to be excited to reach a little bit more. In other words, I haven't had a ton of time to reach further in that particular streak. However, the more I do it, the more I'm thinking about it. And I have been excited to, even just last night, because I have a couple different websites that I go to, and I was filling in information yesterday on a different website. And I got
for family history.
Yeah, for family history. And I really got excited. I was like, I really want to sit down and kind of wrap my head around this, like spend a little bit of time with it. And I thought that is a different thing than I felt before, where before I felt a lot of guilt and a little bit of being overwhelmed with it, where I thought, I don't even know where to start with this.
Whereas now you're not overwhelmed at all.
I'm not overwhelmed. And I think that's one of my favorite things, I guess, as I look at what a streak does is answers those 2 questions that have often been for me is one, kind of where do I start? And in that starting, alleviating that guilt. And then the second question is just being able to, actually, I forgot what the second one was. I just drew a total blank.
Going off into something.
I was going off on how excited I was that it helps you just know where to start. Oh, and not be overwhelmed.
There we go.
I'm with you, Jeff. What can I claim? Jet lag?
No. Well, jet lag, and in all fairness, getting the house packed up, ready to go, ready to make the big move. I mean, you have been organizing and putting things in order in a high level as far as getting the inventory of our home put together because of some of the things that we're putting in storage for quite some time.
Should we do an organizational podcast?
I think that you would be phenomenal at an organizational podcast. So moving forward, though, on Laughably Simple, just before we get there, one other thing that yesterday Laurel who produces much of our social media content, did produce this, send it out via Instagram, probably Pinterest. I didn't look on Pinterest, but this is Instagram and LinkedIn on our social media sites. And this is the quote that she put in our social media site. She said, "Never discourage anyone who continually makes progress, no matter how slow." Now, that is originally attributed to Plato, and she writes that this is what she wrote after it. The above quote, attributed to Plato, rings true. "If you are not in the race, don't criticize the runners." Any step forward is a step in the right direction, and those people who are inching their way forward deserve our cheers, not our jeers. Celebrate the small win of someone today.
That is great.
I was highly moved by that. I wanted to comment on it. I did comment on it finally.
How come you were highly moved? What do you mean?
Because it embodies everything that I look at as far as streaking is concerned. Mm-hmm. It is continual progress. It's never settling where we are. I was reading this morning, actually, in my studies, Jim Collins writing about good to great in the social sector. It's a little abstract that he wrote based on his book, Good to Great. And it talks all about progress and about moving forward in the little things and ensuring that that progress is what's celebrated, and not necessarily that, if you've arrived somewhere, the accomplishment is, because as soon as you've arrived or gotten to the accomplishment, you are taken immediately, and you say that I've arrived, then you're taken immediately to mediocrity. Isn't that interesting? So you're always aspiring to be someone. So as I look at this and consider the community of cheering and moving all of us forward toward progress, no matter how slow, embodies streaking.
And I love that, because the concept of no matter how slow is inherent in that, is that there's continual movement in the direction you want to be going. Instead of focusing on getting to this certain place or how fast you get there, it's more, which is what we've talked so much about who you want to be.
I'm going to spring one on you.
I always get nervous when you say that.
I know you
Go
do,
ahead.
But you shouldn't. Tell the story about you and Chance finding the turtle.
Okay. Oh, that we were, yesterday we went on a walk.
Yeah.
And we found a turtle across the street. And he was in the middle of the street in a cul-de-sac across the street. So we picked him up and brought him to our yard. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, he's going to get run over on this street. And so we crossed the street and we put him in our grass, and then we went on our walk. So 28 minutes later, because I had my watch on, we come back and the turtle's not there. He's not in our yard anywhere. And Chance finds him across the street, further down the road than where we had found him originally. So he had come out of our lawn, crossed the street, and come all the way back to where he was, plus further down the road. And Chance had me do a video. And in the video, he's like, he went from my house to over here. So I don't know how slow turtles are, but they keep going.
That is exactly a beautiful story that relates to what we're going to talk about now as far as getting back to basics and law number 1, which is keep it laughably simple. Now, the origin of laughably simple, let's just kind of have a little bit of fun here. What do you remember as far as going back and thinking because this is a long time ago, 5 or 6 years ago? You're smiling.
This is me. I claim credit for this law.
Okay,
That's why I'm smiling.
Yeah, you've got this little smirk on your face that I'm like, oh, she's got something going on.
That's because I'm like, law number 1 is my law. I'm just going to claim credit for that one. Law number 1 it happened before we realized what we were doing. And it was when I read about this couple streak running, so running a mile every day for 15 years. I was inspired and wanted to do that, but I also was hesitant. I was hesitant at where I was in life and my ability to hold myself to that level of a standard, a mile every single day. And so of running. But I was also inspired by their consistency, and I wanted to be consistent. And so as I was thinking in my head, what can I do? How could I be consistent? I appreciate what they've did and it's inspiring, and I want to be consistent like what they've done, but I don't feel confident that I can do it at that same level at this time of my life. And so that's when I called you and said, do you want to start a streak with me? But in my mind, I was thinking, I'm going to run or walk. Like I gave myself this caveat, a mile, 6
I'm
days a week.
curious
And
as
so I did it so that it's what I felt like I could be successful at. For me, I made it, I picked something that I'm like, this is simple enough that I can be consistent in this.
So just a quick little segue. What was it? How come you wanted to start it with me? How come you didn't just want to start it on your own? What was it? I mean, was it just because we ran together all the time, or what was it about it? Do you remember? And I'm just more curious about that. I don't think I've ever asked what it was.
That's a good question. I wonder if it was we were running together a lot, but I also think inherently there was, when you want to start something that maybe I wanted someone to do it with.
Yeah, you're not quite sure about it, and you want someone to do it with, or I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth.
And a little bit both of what we were talking about with the cheering and also the motivation of doing it together, someone that would be doing it with me so that I have that pull.
Yeah.
And maybe at the time I was thinking accountability.
Yeah.
A little bit.
It's interesting.
I don't know. I guess I haven't.
And we'll explore that more in law number 3, which is create a community. But in law number 1, so you basically looked at it and said, I've got to make this simple enough. Did you at the time put it together and say, I've got to make it simple enough so that on the most difficult day I can still do it, I can still keep the streak alive? Or was that not really a conscious thought yet?
I don't know how conscious that thought was, but I do know there was a shift. There was a big shift because we were talking about running. And up until that point, the way that I had been thinking about running was always the next race and running it faster than I had the previous race, or getting a personal best, or increasing my mileage, or there was always something that I was needing to do faster or better or longer than what I had done before, that I was working towards that. And I had reached a point that I was struggling with that a little bit. And when I read about them having this streak, there was a conscious shift from, what if I don't worry about how fast or how far, and I just worry about every day? Like, so that was an actual shift in the way that I was thinking about my running.
So we started the running streak on March 23rd, 2015. And from there, that's where I remember the next moment as far as coming up with Laughably Simple was the moment that I recognized that it could be applied to so many more things than just physical activity. I think that we limit ourselves because mostly streaks are associated with something in athletics, sports, a winning streak or a streak of, I don't know, it's consistency, but a consecutive streak is in the athletic arena most of the time. So when I came across and looked at and realized that a streak could be set in any discipline, in any area. And that's where the OG streak after the one that was running was flossing my teeth. And even that was physical in nature. But then all of a sudden I recognized, I've been wanting to write for quite some time. What if I, just like what you said, switch my focus from writing something to how many days in a row I can write something?
And I think with every streak that I've set, I've had an actual tangible shift in focus in that from this idea of I'm going to necessarily accomplish this thing to this shift of, can I be consistent in this? How many days can I do this? Can I keep this going? That is a shift in the way that you think about the thing that you are looking at doing, like with your flossing of your teeth. There was a true shift in the way that you were thinking about that from, whether it was guilt or I wanted, motivated to want to keep my teeth or get to the dentist the next time. Any of the things that, I don't know if those are accomplishment based, but do you know what I mean? They were event based or something. It was a shift to, I'm not even going to think about any of those things and just focus on, can I just do this a little bit every day?
And how many days in a row can I do this? How many
days in a row? Yeah, keeping track of that.
Because I wasn't even thinking about the actual activity anymore. No. It's the how many days in a row can I do this carried the activity along. And I think that's where it really started to gel, that this can be applied in so many different areas. And now, 6 years later, with many streaks in many different areas of my life, and you have many different streaks in many different areas of your life, and we look at the 4 different areas as personal, professional, physical, and spiritual. As I look in each one of those 4 areas, I can see specific streaks that I do in order to become who I want to be. Now, again, I keep going down the path, but let's stay with Laughably Simple for just a second. So when we were first talking about law number 1, it was originally just keep it simple.
Right.
And then we progressed to Laughably Simple. What do you think? What do you think as you kind of look at that, the difference between just keep it simple and keep it laughably simple, or make it simple and make it laughably simple?
Keep it simple. Simple is an interesting word because it's self-defined in that regards. And so keeping it simple, you're just like, oh, okay, I'll just keep it simple. When we changed it to laughably simple, I felt like what we were trying to communicate is this idea that so simple that it's laughable, that there's no reason you wouldn't do it. And what that did for me was take into account life. Take into account that you're going to be going through all different things in your life, and you have those up moments and those down moments and those motivated moments and not motivated moments, and just all of the aspects that come with this human experience. And if my focus is going to be on being consistent through all of those moments, it has to be laughably simple in this moment. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing because there are some times that laughably simple may not be so laughable. Do you know what I mean? In the sense that you've got a lot going on and it's taking a little bit to but you're still able to do it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no.
So I think it was
yes, it does.
We were
I said, yeah, no. I don't know. Yes, it makes sense.
It makes sense. To me, it was super important that it did change to laughable because laughable communicates how simple it needs to be. Mm-hmm. And as we talk about it, I think the reason it needed to be that way is we've talked so much. I loved what you were talking about with the floor, that we've spent a lot of time in our American society, maybe society in general, talking about how important it is to reach for the stars, to reach for our goals. And that is important. However, I don't feel like we spend any time talking about how to stand on the floor. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a solid foundation, your reaching ability is not going to be so great. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I feel like laughably simple is it's saying, look, we're just going to talk about the floor for a little bit. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about the floor very often, mm-hmm. but you need to be able to have a solid floor to stand on. Sometimes you have a floor that you're laying on, but
you still have a floor.
But you still have a floor. And a floor is better than a hole, which is sometimes where I felt like before I had a streak, I would go so long without doing anything. I felt like I was in a hole, and getting out of a hole is a lot harder than getting up off the floor if you've been laying on the floor for a while. Maybe I'm taking the analogy too far, but does that make sense?
It's a great metaphor. Yeah, completely. What I hear you saying and what I look at is when I'm standing on a floor to reach for something and I fail at reaching for that thing, I still have a floor on which to stand. And that's what I see as the streaks. When it's laughably simple, and I remember the day that we came up with laughably simple and how we just glommed onto it immediately when the individual in the audience, when we were presenting streaking,
laughed at it.
She laughed at what she laughed at was the streak of write at least one sentence daily. And she laughed.
And why? Because she's like, that is not going to make a difference in your life. That's why law number 1 is, I think, the hardest law for people to accept, is because they immediately look at it and think that's not going to make a difference. That's not going to do any good. And I like what you said too, when you're like, if I'm reaching for a goal and I don't make it, I think the opposite is true too. When I'm reaching for a goal and I do make it, the point is we are not living our lives at a constant level of reaching. That we do that for a while, but it's not sustainable all the time. We can't live at our top game in every area of our life 24/7. We just can't.
It gets frustrating, actually, if you try to do it.
It's impossible. You'll burn yourself out. You'll get discouraged and you'll quit everything, because that's what happens when we try to live at our top game in everything in our life all the time.
Absolutely.
It's just not meant to be. So a streak allows you to accept a floor and then reach in the different areas at different times based on what you need in that moment, without letting go of all the other things that are also important in your life, but you're not reaching for, you're not reaching beyond in this time period. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
I think you're making complete sense. no matter how much you've achieved, I'm quoting Jim Collins now, no matter how much you've achieved, you will always be merely good relative to what you can become. Greatness is an inherently dynamic process, not an endpoint. The moment you think of yourself as great, your slide toward mediocrity will have already begun.
I love that. Dynamic. The concept of constantly moving.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
I know. Doesn't it just kind of pause? Don't you just pause on that for just a second and think about in your life when, as I look at this and say, the moment you think of yourself as great, your slide toward mediocrity will have already begun.
That is interesting.
I love just the opportunity, and we'll talk more about that in the aspirational B statement. Law number 1 sets up the floor on which I can now reach for that particular aspirational self of who I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Making it laughably simple. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up, and it was interesting because I look at creative, ambitious, talented people as ultimately balking at law number 1.
Totally.
One individual with whom I was speaking talked about law number 1, and he used a different word to describe it. He said, you got to make it stupidly simple. And I thought to myself, no, that's not right. It's actually smartly simple.
Yes.
It's laughably simple in the sense of the ease at which it's able to be accomplished, that thing, whatever it is, writing one sentence, reading one paragraph in a book, making at least one connection daily.
Yep.
Any of those things are laughably simple, and we laugh at them because our ego says one thing and our unbelief says another thing that we can't get to it, and it's not big enough.
And because it's not impressive.
But it's not stupid.
But it's definitely not stupid. I would completely agree. In fact, I think it's one of the smartest things you can do to set something laughably simple. And I go back to it, and I just wish I had a better way of saying this, but when you set something laughably simple and you're doing it consistently, you are literally rewiring the way you think about things. Mm-hmm. And from the inside out. And when you're rewiring the way that you think about something, it's going to have a profound impact on the way you live your life.
Absolutely. Well, we are at the end of our time, which means we have to end this conversation on laughably simple, but we may continue it a little bit further as we go into law number 2, or we may continue on law number 1. You'll just have to see what we do next.
We're keeping it basic,
We're
people.
keeping it very basic.
Back to the
basics, because law number 1 is so critically important to your success. If you're looking at setting a streak, set it laughably simple and see how many days in a row you can do it. If you want to reach out to us with your streaks that are laughably simple, please do so at Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at streakingmastery.com, or
Jamie at JAMI at streakingmastery.com, or follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. Go
Pinterest.
on Pinterest. Go online and review the book. We love reviews. They're super helpful.
Please.
Thank you.
That'd be awesome. We got a great review that we'll talk about next time. Until then,
keep streaking.
Grow into what you're hoping. You're in a hurry. Don't even worry. It's too simple.